break down the short run costs that we just did, fixed and variable. We're going to break those down a little bit further into averages and the marginal. This is a good thing to know as a business. You want to know the average total cost of a cup of coffee or a t-shirt or whatever you're trying to sell. You want to know on average, what are we looking at? Okay, so average total cost is pretty straightforward. You are just going to look at the total cost that you're looking at producing. So you'll look at the total cost and you'll divide it by the quantity that you're doing. So for example, let's say you're producing 100 t-shirts and your total cost is 500. You would take the 500 and divide it by 100, and then that would equal 5. So on average, the average total cost of a shirt is $5. Okay, total cost divided by quantity. You're going to do the same thing for the average variable and the average fixed, just finding the total variable cost of a certain quantity and then dividing that by the quantity. All right, and that'll find the average variable and the average fixed. And then another thing that's going to be pretty important is the marginal cost. Again, marginal is just the change or the additional. So marginal cost is the additional cost of producing one more unit. So we're looking at the change in the total cost because we changed the quantity. Another thing about marginal cost is you can also look at the change in the total variable cost when you change your quantity. That's also a possibility. The reason this works is because the total fixed cost doesn't change, right? So the only reason your cost is changing is because the variable cost is changing. So we can look at either one to find the marginal cost. Okay, so let's get some practice with these. We're going to start off with the marginal cost. So this is the example that we looked at earlier. And so marginal cost, we're just looking for the change in the total cost or the change in the variable. So going from here to here, because you produced a latte, you went from $150 to $154. So your marginal cost is $4. You changed by $4. Here to here, same deal. You go from 154 to 158. That's a marginal cost of 4. And you can see here it's going to be $4 again and again. Okay. Average total, we're going to be using the total cost and dividing it by the quantity. So we need the total cost and the quantity. Because we can't divide it by 0, we're going to skip that one. We'll take the total cost and divide it by the quantity. So that's 154 divided by 1, and that should be 154. For the next one, we have 158 and 2. So we'll take 158 and divide it by 2, and that should be 79. For the next one, we'll do 150 divided by 3. So 150 divided by 3. Oh, I'm sorry. Whoops. We'll take the total cost, this number, 162 divided by 3, and we'll do 54. So 162 divided by 3, and that's 54. And then for the last one, we'll take 166 and divide it by 4. So that's 41.5. Okay. So that's how we find the average total cost divided by that quantity. For the average variable, you're doing the same idea. You're taking the total variable cost and dividing it by the quantity. We're going to skip the first one because you can't divide by 0. And then you'll do 4 divided by 1. That's 4. You'll do 8 divided by 2, which is 4 again. You'll do 12 divided by 3. That's 4. And you'll do 16 divided by 4, which is 4. Okay. Again, we're taking the total variable cost numbers and then dividing it by how many we're doing. Finally, we'll do the average fixed. Right? So we'll take the total fixed cost and divide it by the quantity. We'll skip the first one here. We'll skip the first one there. We'll do 150 divided by 1. That's 150. We'll do 150 divided by 2. That's 75. We'll do 150 divided by 3. That's 50. And then we'll do 150 divided by 4, which is 37.5. So that's how we're going to find all of those calculations. Okay. So again, average total, total cost divided by the quantity, average variable, total variable cost divided by the quantity, average fixed, total fixed divided by the quantity, and then the marginal is just finding the change in that. Okay. So that's how we set that up. Another key thing about the average total is you can also find it using the average variable and the average fixed. By adding those two together, you will find the average total cost. Okay, so for example, average variable, average fixed, 154. So we can also add those as well, right? Now, in terms of a graph, if you were to look at this from a practical standpoint, typically average total cost will be a U-shaped form, like a smiley face. The reason that the average total cost is going to be decreasing and then increasing goes back to what we talked about with the diminishing marginal product. Remember, as you make more, you're more productive, more efficient, so your costs are lower. But then you start adding on labor, marginal product decreases, and then your cost increases. So this is why average total will go down and go back up. So if we were to look at our example a little bit further, we would typically see the average total going down and then up. And that's also why the average variable would do the same thing. It will go below the average total. So in terms of a graph here, we would have the average total here. And then we would have the average variable right here, just underneath it. It is also U-shaped, okay, or a smiley face. The marginal cost will follow the same idea where more productive, lower cost, less productive, higher cost. It's going to be more like a Nike check mark though. All right, so if we were to draw that, it would go down and go back up. All right, so generally sloping upward. It's going to be a little bit more steeper in terms of the slope than the average total and average variable. And then finally we have the average fixed. That one's going to be downward sloping. Look here, 150, 75, 50, 37.5. You can see how these are decreasing. So the average fixed cost is just going to be a decreasing line the whole time. So I'm going to draw these a little bit bigger so you can see them. But this is what we're going to do in terms of drawing the cost curves. So you have the total amount and the quantity that you're doing. Average fixed is going to be just downward sloping line, just like this. The marginal cost is decreasing and then increasing. The average total would be right here, and the average variable will be right here. Now I'm drawing the marginal cost going through the bottom right here of the average variable and the average total. When we start doing these calculations, what we're going to find is that the marginal cost is equal to the average total cost at the minimum ATC. So the lowest the ATC is going to go, that's going to be exactly what the marginal cost is going to be as well. This just happens because of the calculations that we did. The same thing is going to happen with the average variable. The marginal cost will be the same as the average variable at the minimum average variable cost. Okay, this goes back to what we talked about with the marginal product. So when these two intersect, this is because the average product and the marginal product are playing a factor with your cost. So just remember when you're drawing these and you draw the marginal cost will go through the minimum points of the average total and the average variable. Okay, so marginal cost equals the average total cost at the minimum ATC. The marginal cost equals the average variable cost at the minimum AVC. Okay? So this is important because it kind of leads us into showing us what's happening with our productivity. For example, when the marginal cost is below the AVC, so marginal cost is below the average variable, so you are more productive. Okay, and so basically increasing production here decreases your average variable. So if your marginal cost is lower than the average variable, you're more productive. So marginal product is doing really well. But if the marginal cost is above the AVC, all of a sudden that marginal product is getting too expensive because the marginal product is lower. And so therefore increasing production here actually increases the AVC. All right, the same thing happens with the ATC. If the marginal cost is below the average total cost, then increasing production decreases that. But if marginal cost is above it, then increasing production increases the average total. And we can see that here because right here, see how the average variable is higher than the marginal cost at this quantity. So increasing production right here actually lowered the AVC. Right? But if the marginal cost was above it, such as here, so here's the AVC and then here's the marginal cost, increasing production again actually raises the average variable cost. So this is why we have the curve like this, to show that change in the marginal productivity. Right? Another thing I wanted to touch on real quick is the average profit, also called the profit margin. This is another key thing that you should know as a business, which is basically how much am I making, let's say $6, and what's my average total cost, let's say $4. So therefore I'm making $2 profit per cup, per t-shirt, things like that. It's your average profit of what your product is. So that's another way of saying your profit margin, very key thing to know as a business. Next, we're going to switch into production in the long run and what that looks like.